There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors China webinar series. This week, we're going to be looking at what you need to know about accounting and tax in China. Each day this week, we're going to be approaching a different topic. Today, we will be talking about how to create your China budget. Tomorrow, we will be looking at the ins and outs of corporate banking in China, but we're going to be taking a practical perspective on what it means for the operations of your company. On Wednesday, we'll be looking at China tax system, explaining the VAT Fapiao invoicing system, and also things that or scenarios that may lead to a tax audit. That's a relatively new subject I'll be approaching on Wednesday's session. And then on Thursday, we're going to be looking at profit repatriation strategies, the truth about outbound payment processes, what does it also mean from an operational perspective. And I do have a surprise guest speaker for Thursday who's going to be coming in and also talking about capital repatriation for individuals that are based in China. If you haven't signed up for any of these sessions, you can do so on our website, woodburnglobal.com/events. It will be an exciting week that's upcoming. Now, the accounting and tax system in China is quite different from anywhere in the world. There have also been efficient changes that have been made during COVID-19. Whether those changes will remain is yet to be seen, but there have been positive updates. Today, we were going to be looking at how to create your China budget, something that for me is very critical for any entity that is entering the Chinese market or that is already operating in the Chinese market. Probably about 80% of the companies that I have incorporated in China have all come within the first 6 months or within the first 12 months of their operation have come into cash flow difficulties because of not creating an appropriate Chinese budget and not having someone on the ground validate that Chinese budget either. So let's let go of the introduction and let's move on to the actual content for today. Now, with my webinar series that I hold every month, there are always new faces. And so this slide is really more directed to the new faces that haven't been participating or those that haven't actually interacted with me. So how these webinars work is that usually I like to know who's online, who's attending them live. So I usually categorize people into 3 categories: the newbies, those of you that have found an opportunity in China and are looking to evaluate that opportunity. So you're on here today basically to gain some form of education on how you can protect your business and how you can move forward. The next category are the startups in China. Usually these are individuals that have operations in China for a period of 1 to 3 years. And they've been so focused on their core business and realizing that there's just simply no growth that's occurring. So they're looking now to see whether they can create certain operational guidelines, make their structures more efficient in order to then be able to grow. And I do have the experienced China hands. I already see a couple of them here today. And these are friends, colleagues, peers that usually come online because they're looking just for new, fresh ideas. Now, with every webinar series, I always gain a new group of attendees. So for those of you that haven't interacted with me before, please do let me know. Who are you? Are you a newbie? Are you a startup? Are you an experienced China hand? It just guides me in knowing how to direct the conversation and direct today's presentation. So just insert newbie, startup, experienced China hand, or just experienced into the chat or the question section of the control panel. Now, how these webinars work is basically I educate you. Most of the education that I give is from practical experiences that I've learned. I'll also be providing case studies, and sometimes I will also be asking you questions. So please, again, this is 60 to 70 minutes of your time. Make it as valuable as possible. This is a complimentary free webinar session. If you do have questions, insert them into the questions section of the control panel. I will try to be go through all the questions that are inserted at the Q&A time, even if that means running over the certain period. The PDF of the presentation will be distributed together with the link of the recording that will be uploaded to our YouTube channel today. Now, just a little bit of a disclaimer. We're all either, most of us that are based in Europe, the US, Australia, wherever that might be, are probably all still in lockdown. And there's obviously a lot more people that are connecting through the webinar systems. Minor disclaimer here, I don't own GoToWebinar. It's simply a platform that I choose to utilize. It's usually very good, very stable. However, I have had people joining where they've had connectivity issues, sound system problems. As I'm speaking, I cannot help you with the technical issues, all right? I apologize for that, but I can multitask, but not to that extent. So usually you will be able to research if you have problems to quickly fix it. Usually, sometimes it takes 30 seconds to come back on. Just be assured this is going to be recorded. So don't get frustrated if you get kicked off of the system. I will be sending you the link to the recording so that you can listen to it in your spare time. That is the best that I can offer at the moment. And again, if you do have technical issues, I apologize up front. But again, it's difficult for me to help you out if you do have some of them. For those of you that are based in China or the Middle East where there's firewalls that are placed by the government, you may have to use a VPN to get a better connection. So if you already feel that it's unstable, get hooked up to a VPN and it should automatically become more stable. Who am I? Let's just put a face to the voice. I'm not using the webcam because I do know that a lot of people are working from home and they may not be having the bandwidth. But starting from the second half of this year, I will start to use the webcam. My name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I've been in the corporate services and compliance sector in China since 2003. This is what I have done for the last 16 years, hitting almost on 17 years. My niche is that I help foreign investors with their inbound investment into China. I have worked with over 500 companies on their market entry strategies, implementations, as well as their acceleration and growth in the Chinese market. And I'm also a creator of the China Roadmap program. I created a webinar session simply on that program. It's up on our YouTube channel if you want to take a look at it. I'll also touch on it very, very briefly in today's session. During COVID-19, I wrote an ebook. I know that China is getting out of COVID-19 period, but basically I wrote a book about what we've learned during COVID-19 in China, what have been the opportunities that have come about, looking at also compliance issues, HR issues, etc. If you would like to get a complimentary copy, email me, Christina@woodburnglobal.com. Happy to give you the China ebook. So I did want to touch on the China Roadmap because it's a program that I developed earlier on in the year, really for the newbies and for the startups, but it's still applicable to the experience China has. This is a roadmap that I basically can put every single one of my clients on, as well as Woodburn on, in order to understand what is the journey that a company is going to take in China. I've created 3 milestones. Opportunity is 1, implementation is the 2nd, and growth is the 3rd. And basically what I call 9 superpowers. So superpowers that you need to acquire in order to make sure that your business grows and accelerates in the Chinese market. So we're looking at the 9 superpowers one after another. The first under milestone 1 would be education, which you're all going to get today, then research, and then developing a strategy and a budget, right? That has to be put from pen to paper. Then comes the implementation 1, which is developing an ecosystem in China, a network of people that can help you, guide you, be your mentors, there's always questions you've got to ask in relation to the Chinese market, and you've got to have that ecosystem in place. Then protection, and not just relating to trademarks, patents, and copyrights, but protection about employment issues, contracts. You know, you want to develop a suit of armor around your business to make sure nothing can infiltrate it. Now, it sounds beautiful when I say it, and in reality, it doesn't happen. But you want to go out into China making sure that you can be protected. And no matter what stage you're at, there's always new forms of protection that can be added in. Then you've got to develop system processes, operational guidelines of how you want the business to run and be maintained. And everything has to be continuously updated and controlled. And the last milestone is growth. It's being able to read the numbers, the financial management reports. The next step is being able to analyze them. And the last is being able to make concrete, solid management decisions on how you want to move the company forward. And that requires a lot of focus and attention. And to do that, you need to have the financial management reports in place where you can analyze and then move forward on making decisions. So these are sort of the 9 superpowers I've created. This is sort of the China roadmap. Today, we're looking at superpower number 3, which is creating your budget and putting basically pen to paper. So what are we covering today? We're looking at how important it is to create a budget, how to create that budget for your China business, and then when it comes to the actual reality, how to check the actual numbers against the budget. Okay, and we're going to be providing a couple of tips along the way as well. So what I would love to know from everybody that's on here today is, have you ever created a budget for your China business? The answer is yes or no. So just simply write yes or no. And then following on from that question is, were you happy with that budget and did you use it to its fullest potential? Which again is a yes or no answer. So you can type yes dash yes, yes dash no, no dash no, however you want to do it. But I would love to know if you've actually created budgets. Now, budgets, particularly for entrepreneurs who are not finance oriented, they don't even know how to start besides opening Excel on their computers. They don't know first of all, what does a template look like? And I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs. And when I first started out in 2003, I was 22 years old. I also didn't know how to create a budget. It was something that I learned and learned and learned, and then finally found its potential. Now, I don't like creating budgets. It's something that I really try to postpone as much as I can until I get warnings from my directors and whatnot. But it's something that is just so useful when it comes to the actual month-to-month business or day-to-day business. So although it may seem that it imposes constraints on your business, ultimately it is a tool that helps you reach the goals that you want to achieve. And ultimately, putting the numbers down in your budget, those are actually the goals that you want to achieve. And it can be a great source of inspiration and motivation to try and reach those goals. So why is it so important to create a budget? Well, quite frankly, without a budget, you have no ability at all to plan for the future. Now, 2020 is a perfect year to show how important it is to have a budget, because we were all impacted by a scenario that nobody could have foreseen. Okay, you could have done all the scenario planning that you wanted to do, but nobody would have predicted COVID-19. And one thing that I have actually never done in my career before is I am actually updating my budget on a month-to-month basis because of COVID-19 and the crisis that is occurring. And it is helping me to see how to manage my cash flow. It is helping me to predict how certain things might happen in the second half of the year, and what might happen in 2021. Now, fortunately, in my business, I haven't had the requirement to lay people off, but for some clients of mine, they have had to utilize the budget and the cash flow analysis and forecast to actually see whether they've had to let people go, to see whether they've had to reduce salaries and things like that. It is a tool that has been invaluable to them during COVID-19. So the budgets are something where you've got to know where the money is coming from. You've got to know where the money is going. You've got to know if you need more money to come in. It helps you to see whether you're losing business, whether you're gaining new clients, new business. It helps to see whether it acts as a control tool to see whether you're overspending or not overspending. It gives you all of this insight into your organization. And it is so critical for you to keep looking at that consistently throughout your year-long operation, because in China, your fiscal year is the calendar year. It's January to December. So it's something that you want to look at on a month-to-month basis. Now, I've listed here, for me, the top 10 reasons why you should really be creating a budget even before you enter the Chinese market. One is that you need to be able to analyze how much cash, how much registered capital you should inject. Registered capital is the working capital that you're going to utilize to initially pay off all of the expenses associated with the company before actual revenue enters your account, okay? And the biggest question for most people is, well, what's the minimum amount? How much should I put in? Well, you've got to create a cash flow analysis and you've got to create a budget to know how much you need to inject and know how much you need to sustain and maintain your business. It also keeps you focused on your investment goals, which is critical because if you're looking to gain investors who are going to inject capital into your company, well, those investors are not going to inject anything if they don't know what the investment goals are and how they're going to get a return on their investment, right? So creating the budget for these investors is critical. It makes you aware of what is going on with your money. Like I said, it helps you to control how much is coming in, where you're utilizing it, and how you're spending it. It obviously helps you to organize your spending and savings. If you're a good financial controller, if you've got a good financial controller, it helps you to control all of the financing and spending that's occurring. It makes you decide in advance how your money will work for you, and that goes in conjunction with developing your business plan. It also enables you to save for expected and unexpected costs, like, for example, COVID-19, where costs suddenly, I don't know, increased just somehow throughout any of these scenarios and obstacles. That first month that the crisis came about, you know, you were paying more to protect your business, basically. You wanted lawyers to check all the force majeure clauses. You were spending more money on the phone talking to clients and employees and settling everybody. So for us, for example, the costs did rise in February, particularly in relation to the scenario of COVID-19. It obviously enables you to communicate with your investors about money. Now, I always believe that you need to have such clear, transparent communication with your investors. The investors are only concerned, not only, but pretty much most of the time concerned by the money they've put in and the money they're going to get back, okay? In order to be able to communicate with them transparently, clearly, you've got to have something, pen to paper, with numbers on it that you understand and that you can analyze, okay? Budgets also help you with early warnings, right? If potential problems are going to arise. COVID-19, there was no red flag for me, but there have been other scenarios in the past where I did get warning signs and red flags. It helps you determine if you can take on debt and how much debt, and also enables you to produce extra money. For example, new service revenue line items or trade. You know, if you're pivoting your business in a certain direction, you can look at that through the budget as well. So there's a lot of useful reasons why you should be budgeting immediately when you're thinking about entering the Chinese market, okay? Now, the registered capital is something that is a truly big issue with most companies. Now, with the new foreign investment law that came out January 1st, 2020, prior to Jan 1, when you were setting up a company, there were two numbers you had to give to the Ministry of Commerce. One was the total investment amount, and the second was the registered capital amount. And there was a ratio between these two figures. Okay. With the new foreign investment law, actually, the total investment amount is no longer, it should be no longer required to submit. However, I've done a few incorporations in the first half of this year, just to show, I'm saying that to give a bit of confidence that there are still people that are investing in China, even through COVID-19. And although we're only supposed to give the registered capital amount, we've also still been required to give the total investment amount, which is why I've continued to add it on this slide. Although in theory, with the legislation and regulations, it's no longer valid. I still put it here to think about in case it has to be submitted, okay? Registered capital is the working capital. It's what physically goes into your bank account in China. Within the term of validity of your entity, it is utilized as your capital to pay off expenses as revenue starts popping in. It's also utilized for any future investments that you want to make. Total investment amount is a ratio number according to the registered capital amount. The difference between the two is what is called your foreign debt, and it is what I call emergency funds, which again, under the new foreign investment law, this foreign debt doesn't exist. However, I'm mentioning it here because for those incorporations I've done in the first quarter of this month, it was still valid. There are no minimum, so the last point on this slide, there are no minimum capital requirements in China. Previously in the past, there was always minimum capital requirements given by the government, and I used to get so frustrated because companies would just say, oh, Christina, don't bother us with this, we will just input the minimum. And I'm like, no, is that going to be enough to run your business? And nobody was creating a budget to actually know how much was needed to run the business. So as soon as the government revoked the minimum capital requirements, it actually pushed a lot of individuals and companies to create budgets to know exactly how much they needed, which I found so much more useful than when starting to talk to people and starting to talk to companies about their businesses. It is important for each company to calculate their projected budget, as well as their cash flow needs. You really do need sufficient funds to maintain your entity in China until you're cash flow positive, okay? Now, there are too many investors who try to spend ways on how to minimize their capital investment. Now, maybe we don't all know, but I will tell you now, registered capital is also the liability of the company. So it is true, you don't want that number to be too high, but you do need that number to be just right to maintain your entity and pay off all the expenses so that you don't have any instability within the organization, okay? Now, I have some entrepreneurs in particular who just throw numbers together. That's not how you should be doing it. You need to take time because China is not as cheap as it used to be, particularly if you're going into cities like Shanghai or Beijing, where office rent is more expensive, salaries are more expensive. Don't forget that a lot of people forget to calculate social insurance amounts and other things into those salaries. It is becoming more and more expensive. So just throwing numbers together from articles you've read is not sufficient. And I'm going to be providing you tips today on how to get the real numbers for your budget. In addition to that, everything in China, when you're talking about your entity and the compliance around it, is very bureaucratic. So when you've registered your company, you've set it up, bank accounts are opened, you have the bank account number for the capital account, you can now remit the registered capital into it. But if you then say at that point in time, so that's 3 months later, because it takes about 3 months, 4 months to set up the company, and you say, oh, you know what, we really did miscalculate, we're going to need more money, you cannot just remit more money. If you do, it will be treated as income, and then it'll be subject to tax. If you actually need more registered capital, you have to go through a 6 to 8 week application process to actually increase the registered capital before any additional funds can be entering into the account. Okay, so, again, everything has a bureaucratic angle to it, and you're not just free to remit when you want to remit. Okay, you've got to understand what the bureaucratic procedures are behind everything. Now, there are obviously differences between representative offices and limited companies. I do want to mention that here because I am starting to get more and more inquiries for representative offices. I'm not a fan of them, primarily because when I've seen the last 16 to 17 years of the trends of my clients, almost everyone that started off as a representative office has now converted into a limited company. And why they didn't just start off with a limited company is something I don't always understand. A lot of it is very psychological versus practical. But you really do have to make an analysis on the structure you want to create and the benefits it's going to bring you in the long term. Ultimately, a representative office does not have registered capital, but you still have to bring funds in to pay local expenses. And very superficially here, the calculation of the tax on a representative office is approximately 10% of the expenses that are spent locally. Okay, so in the long term, there's no real tax advantages by having this representative office, and it really does not provide any additional operational advantages either. The limited liability company, on the other hand, the LTD, has to have this initial capitalization of this registered capital. Now, this registered capital enters the account. There's no tax consequences on it at all. It's just your working capital that comes in. You use it to pay off expenses until revenue is actually starting to be achieved, to be acquired. Tips for calculating your registered capital. I don't like giving these tips because ultimately what I want everyone to do is point number 3, which is to do a budget and do a 3 to 5 year projection on how much cash is actually required to maintain and sustain the company. If you don't want to do that, and again, I can't put a gun to your head and force you to do it, is the following. The Ministry of Commerce, as well as the tax bureaus, they like to see companies that have registered capitals of more than 1 million renminbi. Does it bring you any benefits? It does not. They just like to see it because for them, again, it's psychological. It shows a greater commitment to the market, and probably your discussions will be more fluid. If you are an entrepreneur and you do not have this 1 million renminbi, do not fake it because you will have to bring in 1 million renminbi from your shareholder within the term of validity of your entity. So if you decide that you choose the minimum term, which is 10 years, you have 10 years to bring in from abroad this 1 million renminbi. Okay. The second aspect, which again, I don't really like, but it's now happened. No government bureau has to see a business plan or budget. Okay, I wish I could delete that from this slide, but I get it, this asked so often. Nobody has to see it. You should be creating it for yourself, for your investors, to know how much money you need and to know what your capital goals are for the company that you're setting up in China. Okay, so do try and create this budget. Now, if you run out of registered capital, which again, as I highlighted in the intro, probably about 80% of my clients do run out of it, you have a couple of options available to you. One is that as long as you have to give a total investment amount to the government, which is according to pre-Jan 1, 2020 regulations, you will have what's called as foreign debt. This foreign debt can come into the bank account as a loan, can also be paid back. That's the only type of loan that exists in China is through this foreign debt. Under the new foreign investment law, point 1 on this slide is actually no longer valid. All right, I have left it inside here because my clients that I've incorporated, they have it as of Q1 2020. So I want you to be aware of it because it may not continue. All right, we have to see how it goes. Within the next 5 years, it will be revoked. Okay, there will be amendments to this, but for now, I'm leaving it inside. The simplest is you can increase your registered capital amount. Remember, that also increases your liability. Okay, so you have to go through a pros and cons checklist of whether that makes sense for you. The third is you can also create service agreements, preferably that are true and valid, to receive funds from the shareholder. The downside to point 3 is that there are VAT and withholding taxes that are applicable. So point 3, there's a tax implication. Point 2, there's a liability implication. Point 1, we're not 100% sure how that is going to continue under the new foreign investment law regulations. But if you do have this option of the foreign debt, that is a way of bringing funds in. That's been a way that most of my clients have remained capitalized during COVID-19, is by bringing in their foreign debt. So let's start off with how to create your budget, okay? How to project cash flow and costs. So when you're going to open your Excel sheet, you've got to start putting items down, okay? So let's forget about cash flow for a moment. The easiest way to start is to think about your costs, okay? So what are your expenses going to be? Well, you might have these one-off costs like, I don't know, deposits that have to be paid. That's also part of your cash flow. Deposits that have to be paid up front. You're going to buy computers. You might buy printers. You may, if you're getting a brand new office space, you'll have to decorate it. There'll be renovation costs, then furniture costs, then installations for lighting, you know, Wi-Fi connections, and all of these types of things. Then obviously you've got your variable costs. So if you're trading or you're producing, you'll have raw material costs, potentially overtime costs. And then you've also got fixed costs, right? You've got rent, salaries, potentially financing costs, and you've got to make your full list. Okay, and I have a slide on here that can start you off. Okay, but you've got to add all of these items in. You've got to think about every single expense that will pop up within your organization. Now, once you have these itemized lists, the next thing is you got to put numbers beside them, right? Now, I like to create a budget that is month to month. So I create it from January to December, and there is a column for each month. And then you've got a total figure. So it gives you an annual budget. Now, why do I like to do it month to month? I like to do it month to month because then when my actuals are actually produced, I look at my actuals month to month with the budget, and then also reflect on the year-to-date totals, okay? How are you going to find out the numbers? Now, quite frankly, in terms of costs, this is the easiest. You don't imagine them. You don't read articles about them. You actually contact suppliers. So if we're talking about rent, and you're not quite sure yet where you want to rent, well, first you contact 2 to 3 business centers. You get estimates. You then talk to a real estate agent and you say, I need a 60 square meter office space in so-and-so area. Please provide me with a cost analysis of how much that is going to be in terms of rent and management fees, okay? These suppliers, these real estate agents, business centers, whomever, they're going to give you figures. You then have to know what figure you want to put in based on what type of office that you want. Salaries. You go to HR agents or headhunting agents and you say, I want to hire a finance person. You know, I need them to do X, Y, Z. This is the responsibility list. What, you know, for this responsibility list, are they a junior accountant? Are they a senior accountant? Are they a finance manager? In Shanghai, what is the budget for this person? Then you say, okay, with this budget of between, I'm making up numbers now, 15,000 renminbi and 20,000 renminbi, what will be the social insurance on top of that? And what can I afford? 15,000 or 20,000? That way, when you go through the interview process, you're also not wasting your time. You're talking to people within the right salary range based on your budget, okay? But you're talking to HR professionals who know the market and are working in it on a day-to-day basis, right? You're not imagining figures out of your head. You've got to know what the actual trends and estimates are today, okay? When you're looking at raw materials, who do you go to? You go to your raw material suppliers and you say, I need steel. How much does steel cost? I need this quantity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you go through that. You go to service providers that sell computers. You figure out what the ranges are. What type of computer do you want? You've got to have communication with these suppliers to get the numbers. And quite frankly, this is the easiest step of creating your budget because nothing is coming from you. You don't have to make any calculations besides writing to these suppliers, phoning them, and getting estimates and proposals, and then making decisions of what you want for each of these itemized items within your expense list, okay? And this includes you have to think of things like stationery. Are you going to have, are you going to rent a car for an expat? You know, there's so many different types of costs you have to think about. If you're going to outsource to a lawyer certain functions, what are the lawyer's fees? If you're going to outsource to an accountant, if you're going to outsource to a payroll agent, if you're going to use a marketing agency, what are the marketing costs? Contact 2 to 3 different suppliers, get proposals, choose one that fits your needs, fits your costs. Now, I just want to mention here, don't always go with the cheapest, go with the right one. Think always about long-term relationships. Once you've got your costs ready, it helps to create your cash flow. And again, you should be able, or you should be doing your cash flow analysis on a month-to-month basis. How much cash are you going to spend based on the expenses that you will have on a month-to-month basis? Okay, it will help you to understand what you need. Critical when you're starting up your business. Critical when you're continuing your business year on year. All right. Now, revenues, for me, are the trickiest, especially if you have never transacted in China. How will you know what numbers to put in for revenue? Very, very difficult. So if you've never transacted with China, the only data that you can utilize is through research. Superpower number 2 in my China Roadmap program is research that you've conducted that helps you to garner data, such as competitor benchmarking, pricing analyses, because you got to know how much you're going to sell your products or services for. So pricing analysis, competitor benchmarking, looking at just current trends, okay? Utilizing that data will help you to create your revenues if you've never transacted with China. If you have already transacted with China, then you have a certain level of sales history and you have a certain idea of how that trend is developing within your organization. So you have to either use data from physical research or sales history for your year one, okay? When you are continuing to develop your budget year on year, you've got to use those 2 functions. You've got to use research and you've got to use sales history to really understand. If you don't do a competitor benchmarking and you find out that your competitors have either reduced prices or increased prices, how do you know where to value yourself? You've got to continue doing that research, okay? And also then look at the sales history that's occurring, okay? And again, doing it month to month. Looking also at the projects that are popping up, inquiries that are coming in, and whether those inquiries will actually be implemented into projects and sales. So I agree with you. Revenue, very, very difficult to do. Costs, very simple. You have suppliers, you reach out to the suppliers, they give you the proposals. Okay? In terms of revenues, that becomes a little bit of a tricky area where you've got to use your gut instincts, but to make valid decisions, you've got to use data. You've got to use some form of data. So questions to ask yourself: what are the projected sales for the budgeted period? Okay, careful. I know that when people go into China and they see a lot of the media news, they get very, very excited. about what is the potential, but you've got to turn that potential, that opportunity into concrete data and numbers. So don't overestimate, be conservative with your figures. What are the direct costs of sales? What are your fixed costs and overheads? So here's a guideline for the fixed costs and overheads. All right, so this is a list I've prepared for you to create your itemized list of items. First is cost of premise. So for me, the first two are the largest amounts of costs that you're gonna have. It's the cost of premises, rent, management fees, taxes, service charges, etc., and staff costs. So wages, social insurance, allowances. Now you have a choice when you create your budget. You can have very generalized item, cost of premises, and you put the total figure in there. You can have a very generalized item in your budget for staff costs, and you put the total in there. I don't do that. I have to go down to the nitty gritty. Why do I go down to the nitty gritty? Because I want to be able to compare year on year all the subheadings on these generalized headings. So for example, cost of premises. I want to know in a subheading, the rent, the management fee, and any service charges. Under staff costs, I have underneath that gross salary, social insurance, allowances, commissions, and bonus. Under utilities, I have broken it down into electricity, telephone, broadband. Because if, for example, you don't break that down and you see year on year that utilities increase, but you don't actually really know which utility is increasing, is it electricity? Is it telephone? Is it broadband? How can you evaluate and make a decision to change a service provider? You can't, right? Maybe you've got to change telephone companies. Maybe, for example, with the cost of premises, rent remains the same, but the management fees are increasing considerably year on year. That doesn't make you feel very confident staying in that office building. Maybe you've got to look for a new place so that you can control the cost. You've got to be able to control your expenses. So going down to the nitty gritty should help you to do that. When you're looking at legal and professional costs, sure, you can generalize and keep that as one item. But if you've got a lawyer, an accountant, an insurance broker, you should break that down so that you know if that number is increasing, why is it increasing? So that you can analyze and then make a decision to either change, not change, remain. Same for advertising and promotion. So you might have a marketing agency. You might have several marketing agencies. You might even have a PR firm. You might then do outside advertising. So break it down so that you know why things are increasing or decreasing year on year. Make it as detailed as possible, okay? Again, don't rush it. Think about the fixed costs and overheads. You don't have to come up with these numbers. Your suppliers have to give you the numbers, you inject them, but make sure it's as detailed as it can possibly go. Now, you've got to make sure that three things happen. You've got to use your budget against your business plan so that you have a financial action plan, okay? The budget, the business plan means you've got a financial action plan on how to move forward with your cash. You've got to have a benchmarking performance, okay? And use that as an indicator. And then you've got to also have KPIs. You've got to monitor the drivers of your business to make sure that everything is running smoothly, okay? That there are no car crashes that are happening along the way. So the next chapter is looking at how to check the actuals against the budget. Now, this again is where I get frustrated with clients because they have these fantastic budgets that they've created. China kind of forces you to create your financial management reports on a monthly basis because if you are, you will have to submit VAT returns on a monthly basis. So you have the actual opportunity to put the two documents side by side and compare. on a month-to-month basis. Again, not many people do it. And then how do you make decisions? You don't, which is why you don't grow, you don't accelerate your growth in the Chinese market. So what you've got to do is that when your actual financial management report is produced every month, you take your budget and you analyze it. This is superpower number 8. Okay? Now, first of all, when you get your financial management report, make sure you can read it. Superpower number 7. Okay? The number of times I have heard companies tell me, oh, I got the reports in Chinese. I never read them. I also didn't ask questions. I didn't also ask to get it translated. You cannot imagine. Make sure you have the ability to read the P&L and the balance sheet and the cash flow, the actual. Make sure you can read your bank statements. Okay? Then you take your budget and you put it side by side. Your accountants can actually normally do this as well. And then comes the analysis factor, which is actually the fun part of everything. You want to see, it's something that can actually truly motivate you to accelerate your business, which is why I want people to do it. Because if you're doing well, oh my God, what a high you will be on for the next month, knowing that you can achieve your goals. If you've reached a shortfall and you're under budget and you're not going to achieve your goals, you need to know that so you can make some critical decisions on how to fix it right then and there instead of waiting. Okay, you've got to compare the two. So when you have your actual income, we're going to look at each of the items. When you have your actual revenue, right? Analyze the reasons for any shortfall. Was there a lower sales volume? Did you give too many discounts? Do you have underperforming services or products? Which is why, again, for revenue, it's also very important to make it as detailed going into the nitty-gritty as possible. List every single service item and product so you can analyze them individually to know whether they are successful or they're underperforming. Okay? Consider the reasons for the high turnover. Were your targets too low? Or did you win projects that you weren't expecting? Okay? Compare the timings of your income with your projects as well to make sure that everything is fitting as well. And if they're not fitting, why are they not fitting? This is your time to analyze your business to make sure that you continue the momentum of your growth. Your actual expenditure, again, this is a financial controlling tool to make sure you are not overspending. Now, let's face it, in China, there are always opportunities that come at your doorstep, new marketing initiatives that could potentially bring you a lot of business or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So many opportunities, but you grab them because you're so excited and you don't actually analyze the return on investment for them. The budget should tell you whether you can grab them or not. Okay, looking at the budget, looking at the actuals should say, you know what, we've done so well with our revenue, we've got a little bit of extra cash, I'm going to use that little bit of extra cash for this new marketing opportunity. Okay, that's how you should be analyzing these decisions, looking at your numbers and analyzing those numbers. So obviously, look at your fixed costs, look at your variable costs, look at each line item to make sure that it's all reasonable. Okay, analyze how you want to calculate a plus and minus for the reasonable aspect of a value. All right. Now, so now we're looking at year 2 of your China budgeting, and this could be year 2, year 3, year 4. I want to give you guys some tips on how to continue this process and to not feel like you're doing it by yourself, which can be very daunting. Okay, so the first one is obviously you have to know where you want to end up, and that comes through your business plan. It might even come through certain investors who tell you where you should be ending up. Okay. The second point is usually in year 2, you probably won't be at this point a one-man show. You'll have a team of people. They may be sitting in your head office. They may be sitting on the ground in China. Involve the team. In order to get loyalty and trust from the team, this is a point where you want them to give you insight. All right. You want to talk to your salespeople to know What projects are up and coming? What should we budget for revenue? Can each sales team provide a number and make them accountable for it? Okay, include that as part of their KPI for that fiscal year. Be a scenario planner. Very hard to create COVID-19 as a scenario, so we're not going to use that as an example, but create certain scenarios. So for example, if you are selling a product and all of a sudden, and this product is only being produced in the headquarter, and all of a sudden the headquarter says, you know, we're at capacity, we can't produce more, but all of a sudden your sales guys in China are saying, no, we need more, right? That's an issue. That's a scenario that you have to account for. And what is then the solution to that scenario if it does happen? Okay, I have one client in China right now. They've just started off, they're developing their sales, and the biggest worry that they all have is that as soon as this business kicks off, that they won't be able to produce enough for the market. And they haven't yet come up with a solution for that. They're toying around with a lot of ideas, but they need to put something concrete. And now we're almost mid 2020. They will definitely need something for 2021. So when you're creating the scenarios, it does mean you kind of have to create a separate strategies in case those scenarios pop up, okay? Account for everything and account for more than what you plan to spend. I always try to keep a buffer. Again, I call them emergency funds because you tend to always spend a little bit more in China. And this also comes from your suppliers, where they provide you with proposals. Ideally, when you sign off with a supplier, you want to make sure that there's going to be no change in those figures. I'll give you a story of mine. This was probably about 2005, 2006. I started off in a business center, and literally overnight, the business center gave me a notice saying that they were going to increase the rent by 50%. And if I didn't agree, I had 30 days to move out. I couldn't afford that increase. And as such, I had to deal with 1 month of increase, which I hadn't budgeted for. And in the meantime, I had to find a new office space and spend money on that whole process as well. So there are certain scenarios you have to think about. If you have to move office and you have to renovate, how are you going to fund for that if that scenario occurs? Okay, do a little bit of scenario planning in that regard. Make trade-offs where appropriate, meaning don't accept all marketing initiatives. There will have to be certain trade-offs. If you don't have the funds to initiate a certain marketing project, you're going to have to eliminate it from the budget. And that all comes with the financial controlling aspect. And it comes through communication with your team, okay? Make sure you keep profit flow and cash flow targets, forecast and reforecast. I mean, I've been looking at my budget because of COVID-19 on a month-to-month basis and reforecasting month-to-month. And it's been an invaluable tool for me and given me confidence to continue the year, okay? Use competitive bids. Like I said, when you're talking to your suppliers, use competitive bids. Don't always go with the cheapest. Don't always go with the most expensive. Go with the right firm, okay? And obviously use the right tools. So there are software systems in place online that you can purchase that help you to create these budgets. You can also just simply use Excel sheet to help you with that. But use the right tools that fit you and fit your current budget in terms of these software systems that are available. Questions that you can ask yourself in year 2. I've written a few down to inspire you. For example, will you keep prices the same? Will you lower them? Will you raise them? Do you think you will introduce new product lines, new service lines? Do you think you will eliminate certain products because they were underperforming in that year? Are your suppliers going to increase prices, reduce prices, give you certain rent-free periods like COVID-19, etc.? Do your staff need training? Do you need to spend money on that training? Do you need to purchase certain software tools or other sorts of tools to help you develop and grow your organization? These are just certain questions to raise with yourself, especially in the second year, once you've had 1 year of experience. And these are questions to ask yourself every year following that. Now, just to conclude, we're almost hitting the 60-minute mark. Don't rush yourself, okay? A budget should not be thrown together haphazardly because you're in a rush to incorporate a company and you need to throw a figure together. Be patient with yourself, create that budget, and have somebody validate it for you. Have somebody ask the questions back and forth. You know, why have you come up with this number? How have you come up with this number? Are you confident with that number? Go through each list of items and have someone kind of brainstorm with you and be your, how do you call that, your back and forth. Have these back and forth discussions and questions, sort of like your coach, so to speak. Do it right, take time, and most importantly, make sure that when you create the budget, it's also in alignment with your business plan, okay? So if there's something in your budget that isn't in alignment with your business plan, update your business plan, and vice versa. Be conservative. Enthusiasm is great, but not when the results disappoint, because it doesn't motivate you, it doesn't motivate the team. So be conservative, okay, with your numbers and figures. When in doubt, always have what I call these emergency funds. Have a bit of slack and wiggle room on your projections, so that you know you've got spare funds, and you're not being too enthusiastic. And then start early. So as I mentioned earlier, the fiscal year in China is January to December. So if you incorporate your entity right now, we're talking it's May. Most likely it would be set up in May, June, July, August-ish, September-ish. Bank accounts will be opened, which means your budget for 2020 would start, let's say, September 1st, maybe October 1st, okay, to be more conservative. So you still should create a budget for that 3 to 4 month period. And then in your budget, create already for 2021. I always say try to create for 2021 and 2022. So you have 2.5 years. It's just to put numbers down for the 2022 to see how your business is going to grow and develop, okay? But start it early. So if you're year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5 right now, you should probably start your budget discussions in October, right after the October holiday. And you give yourself until the mid of November to have the first drafts there. You use the last 2 weeks of November to have discussions back and forth, so that literally prior to the Christmas holidays, that budget is completed and is ready to be utilized come January 1. All right. If you feel that you're too disorganized, start it in September. Start it as early as you feel comfortable starting to make sure that prior to the Christmas holidays, that budget is checked, ticked off, approved, and ready to be utilized come Jan 1. And then monitor, evaluate, and reforecast. Do not put that budget in a drawer or saved into a folder on your computer that you never look at it again. It should be a habit that on a monthly basis, you sit with your accountant, whether it's an outsourced provider or whether it's somebody in-house, you sit with them and you analyze the hell out of that document, because you need to be able to make decisions on a month-to-month basis. You need to make decisions right there and then, okay? Now, I don't know if there are accountants on here, but let's face it, accountants are not the most sociable of people. So if you are an entrepreneur, you're a general manager, you're a CEO, whatever you might be, but you're a decision maker, make sure you proactively go to your accountant and say to them, next week we've got a meeting, we're going to analyze the actuals against the budgets and prepare them. Say if there are any warning flags, red flags that I need to consider, I want to know right there and then. So we're going to be spending 2 hours in a conference room and going line item by line item. Most of the time in China, you won't see your accountant doing that proactively, okay? But the minute that you start doing it and it becomes a habit and it goes in the calendar for the following month immediately, you know, you're going to accelerate your business tremendously, because you're going to be making decisions so quickly. And these will be key decisions that help you to accelerate and grow your business at the rate that you want it to, okay? So if there's anything I want you to get out of this, it's to make sure that at a minimum, you are sitting with your accountant on a monthly basis and just shooting questions. And, are there red flags? Are there warnings? How is revenue? How is it against the budget? Why not? Let's bring in the sales guy and talk to him why it hasn't been achieved, et cetera, et cetera. You've got to have that time to sit down and do those discussions. How we can help. Okay, this is my only page that I'm selling something to you guys. Well, again, we offer the China Roadmap program. It's a type of coaching program, but it's also a little bit more than that, where we help you to get on the right road and accelerate your growth in China. We offer incorporation advisory. We also do business plan and budget validation. We do incorporations, and we also help on the implementation and growth services too. If you're interested to learn more about any of these things, send me a message. Happy to have a phone call with you and explain it further. That leads me to the next page. If you want to book a strategy session with me to talk it over, then you can book it directly in my diary. I'm going to put the link of it right here in the chat box, so all of you will see it. You can just click on it and set up an appointment. Alternatively, if you want to connect with me on WeChat and have a chat on WeChat, I'm putting my WeChat ID here as well. And then my email, I'm just going to send it in the chat box as well, so you have it, is right there. Okay. Now these strategy sessions, I've gotten feedback that people get overwhelmed with the thought of it. I'm not sure how else I should be wording it. There is no strings attached. This is just a conversation for me to brainstorm with you. If you need help, if you want to have a certain level of validation that you're doing all right, it's just an introductory session to introduce ourselves. And if you do have any questions that you want to talk specifically to your business, I'm happy to have that conversation. If something then pops out of it, fantastic, but it's just a way for me to also build my ecosystem and help you build your own ecosystem for the Chinese market. All right, so we are now going to move on to questions, and we've hit the 60-minute mark, but if there are any questions, we will just go through them. There's a question about, will I be sharing the presentation? Rafaela, I will be sharing a PDF of the presentation, and the recording of this presentation will also be posted up onto the YouTube channel. So Douglas asks a question, is it still necessary to maintain 2 Chinese bank accounts, one for registered capital only? Yes, it is, Douglas. So basically, when you, and I will be going into that in tomorrow's discussion, you set up a registered capital account, which is where your registered capital enters into, and then it gets transferred over into your settlement accounts, where you will have a renminbi basic account, and then you can have a foreign currency settlement accounts. But you do have those 2 separate accounts. Douglas has a second question. Does registered capital have to come from abroad? No, it doesn't have to come from abroad, but my presentations are geared towards foreign investors doing inbound investments. So if you are a foreign investor, usually, the shareholding entity is abroad. I don't recommend individuals to invest, but if you are an individual foreigner, usually that money will also come from abroad. But that's for foreign invested companies. Obviously, if you have a domestic company that you're setting up and the shareholder is a Chinese individual, the money will come from mainland China. Depends on the shareholding structure, Douglas. So from Elaine, could you elaborate a bit more on the difference between registered capital and total investment? What is the obligation for both, and how should a company decide the 2 numbers? Okay, so registered capital, how you decide that number is based on your budget and how much money you need. That's the first number you should be looking at. If a total investment amount has to be submitted to the government, that number does not just pop up. It is a ratio against your registered capital. So if your registered capital amount is under 500,000 USD, then 70% of the total investment will come from the registered capital. So you will have this 30% difference. This 30% difference is what we call foreign debt. that money never has to come into China if you don't want it to, okay? It is what I call emergency funds, where in case you need additional financing, it can come as this foreign debt. It comes into the account as a loan. You will need a loan agreement to get it registered, and it can also be paid back. Elaine, I hope I answered that question for you. That was actually the last question. If you have any other questions, I will give you about 30 seconds in case you do want to add anything in. No? All right, then we will move on. As I mentioned, you can absolutely set up a meeting with me if you want to discuss anything further, or you want to have a bit more clarification about the policies or about how things work, or just talking randomly about budgets or things like that. Again, no obligations. It's to introduce ourselves. I use these as opportunities to expand my network and my ecosystem in China, and it's a way for you to do that as well. And if you enjoyed today and you want to learn more about accounting and tax in China, very, very exciting topics, then you can register at woodburnglobal.com events. I will also type that in here, so I'll make it easy for you. .com/events for our next 3 sessions. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about the ins and outs of corporate banking, like from an actual operational perspective. What do you need to think about in terms of banking in China? How the Chinese tax system works, what is VAT, what is VAT invoicing, and I will also be adding a section in Wednesday's presentation about how or what can lead to a tax audit in China. And then on Thursday, we will be talking about corporate profit repatriation strategies, because everybody likes to know how they can get their money out of China. But it's not just about profit repatriation strategies. There are also a lot of companies that are transacting with China that don't have entities in China. And they always get feedback from the Chinese side saying, oh, it's going to take forever for you to get your money. So I want to talk also about how the physical outbound cross-border payment works, okay, from China to, let's say, the UK, the US, Australia, so you know what that process actually means. And then I'll have Howard Whiteson, who will be joining to talk about the individual aspect of how you can get your money out. So if any of that interests you, please register on the website, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. I know for those of you that are based in the UK, it's a public holiday. If you're in Singapore, it's also a public holiday. Enjoy yourselves. And I hope to see you all again tomorrow. Thanks, and see you soon. Bye.